Welcome to the Good Earth's Weekly Radio Show, another day of living. We're at the historic Vogue Theater in beautiful downtown Broad Ripple, celebrating our 5th anniversary with a wonderful audience ready to join us in all the healthy fun. And now here's your host, Alex Litwack.
Thank you, Rudy. So, welcome. It's really, really great to see everyone here tonight. Really excited about our 5th anniversary. My guest tonight is Nichole Ingersoll. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She has a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and Nursing from Indiana University, a Master's in Science of Nursing from University of Indianapolis, and a board-certified family nurse practitioner. She used to work at Methodist Hospital and IU Health as a nurse practitioner, and then in 2004, she saw the light and became an integrative nurse practitioner. She is now the owner of the NRI Clinic for Complementary Medicine. It's a family practice blending both the best of allopathic and alternative modalities. Nichole was my first guest on the very first show and is our good luck charm. So thank you for being here to celebrate. Please, everyone, welcome Nichole Ingersoll.
Thank you. It's a privilege.
It turns out that Nichole and I never run out of things to talk about. So I have 3 things I'd like to talk about, a little bit of a smorgasbord, and they all start with the letter S. I want to talk about studies, and I would like to talk about sleep, and then I'd like to talk about sperm. So that... All right, so
how we roll.
About 2 weeks ago, there was an article in the New York Times that a study had come out about vitamin D, and that vitamin D was not needed by so many people, that we don't need to be taking vitamin D. People are taking too much. It doesn't do what people think it's going to do. And I read this article, and I was once again baffled, because I don't know how you're supposed to know when a study is good or when a study is maybe even frivolous.
So, I must admit I read that study, Alex. The first thing I'd like to say is usually if you're reading something in a newspaper, online, in a magazine, it's really not a study. It's usually what I call health news. That's the first thing I'd like you to take into consideration. The second thing is they're going to probably use a sensational headline to get you, or title, to get you to read that article, correct? I mean, they make their money by advertisers online at least, knowing how many people are, looking at information. So oftentimes, including this article, rarely is the title, rarely does it have anything to do with the rest of the article.
So do you think people need to be taking vitamin D? Do you think there's an epidemic of people with low vitamin D levels?
So regarding this particular news health article, the title was actually, "Why Are So Many People Popping Vitamin D?" The study was done with 800,000 people in Maine over a period of time. The study was concluded in 2010, which was 7 years ago. And I, being appropriately skeptical of the article, noted many things, which includes probably at the time in 2010, the expected minimum of a vitamin D level would be 20. And in this case, even today, we know that the expected minimum standard medicine protocol is a minimum level of 30. So right there, those are things that I noticed right away. So most people, out of that 800, there were 160,000 that supposedly were taking vitamin D or were recommended vitamin D when they supposedly didn't need it. But in today's standards, if you took that appropriate minimum level of being 30, it would have only been 62,000 people. On top of that, the article never mentions what happened to the other 640,000 people. Did they need the vitamin D? I mean, so these were all patients in very traditional medical practices that had their vitamin D levels drawn. So that's a perfect example of just sensationalizing the article. But to the article or the journalist's credit, at the end they did mention a particular doctor, physician group that also was, the opposing side as far as, yes, everybody needs vitamin D. Here's the things that they, vitamin D helps with, that kind of thing. So having said all that, I will say I had a patient, just to kind of give you a clinical piece here. In all fairness, I had a patient that was taking 10,000 IUs of vitamin D3 without a level having been drawn. That's a lot of vitamin D3 without having a healthcare professional tell you that you need that. And she came in for anxiety and insomnia, and her vitamin D level was the highest I've ever seen in 13 years, and it was double normal on the high end. I mean, she's lucky she did not have a parathyroid storm. So people, I will say, in that case, you have the fringes of people who probably are taking vitamin D inappropriately or when not needed.
My understanding of vitamin D is you need it for seasonal affect. Mm-hmm. It's boosts your immune system.
Correct.
And it's good for bone health.
Correct. And currently in clinical trial, because I did look this up on NIH, National Institutes of Health, which pretty much is the gold standard here in the United States, at least in the medical community. Alzheimer's, they've been doing a lot of research with Alzheimer's right now. They've had some really positive, conclusive studies of vitamin D deficiency contributing potentially to certain forms of Alzheimer's disease and also MS. And I say concluded because they're finishing the studies, therefore I don't like to necessarily talk about that until the study's finished, which is another thing you want to look at in health news. You want to make sure they're not presenting an abstract or a hypothesis. You want to make sure, if you're going to be concerned about it, that they've actually done a study or several studies. And you want to make sure, regarding even vitamin D, that they're testing these things on humans or the studies about humans and not necessarily dogs, cats, rats.
The other thing I see in headlines are things like, vitamin D doesn't cure cancer, or vitamin D doesn't prevent heart attacks. And then when you look through the study, well, it turns out they gave not even therapeutic levels of
Correct.
vitamin D. They gave small amounts of vitamin D, and they maybe gave it on people who had heart trouble to begin with.
Right.
How
Correct.
is that a fair study?
So you always want to look at the context. Again, it goes back to who's funding the study, because in most cases they're funded by drug companies, and vitamin D2 is a prescription medication. Also, you want to make sure that they tested it on an appropriate group of people. I mean, at least in this one, they did a literature review actually on 800,000 patients. There are some studies that only look at 50 patients, 1,000 patients. You want to make sure, to your credit on that point, that they use therapeutic doses of vitamin D. I would expect lower doses than are used today 10, 15, 20 years ago. I know I've developed being more aggressive with vitamin D therapeutically in the 13 years I've been in practice in integrative medicine. So all these things are very important.
Why do you want patients to take vitamin D?
Fatigue. I mean, the number one complaint across the board, 13 years in a row in my integrative medicine practice, fatigue. Even children. I often check vitamin D levels because I can darn well tell you that it's going to help with fatigue, energy levels, brain, and in this case, particularly joints. Not so much the muscles, but joint health.
I was listening to NPR the other day, heard a story about sleep that came out. It said about a third of all Americans are sleep deprived. So I'll just take a show of hands. How many people in this audience do not get a full night's sleep, at least 7 hours? Come on, raise your hands high. Don't be ashamed. Almost half the audience doesn't get enough sleep. So what this article talked about is when you don't get enough sleep, it's almost as if you're impaired, so that you aren't able to function as well on a day-to-day basis and make really smart decisions or healthy or good decisions, whether it be driving a car or what you do at work. So,
in fact, if you lack sleep for a period of 24 hours, you will have a disability equivalent to being drunk at 0.15. They've done at least 10 studies recently that I found in the last 3 years on NIH, all of them done by 20,000 subjects or more. It's unbelievable. So that was pretty impressive to me. Having said that, again, back to the number one reason people come in, fatigue. And so one thing I will ask them is, how are they sleeping? Falling asleep, staying asleep? Are you having problems with either of those or both? Sleep is just obviously so important. In fact, I kind of say sleeping and pooping. Those are very important functions for us as humans. So if I get you sleeping and pooping, you're a much happier camper.
So it makes us all sound like we're infants. You know,
Yeah, well.
right? When you're an infant, eat, sleep, and poop. Those are the things.
Correct.
So it's pretty much so it doesn't change.
Correct.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. No rocket science there.
No.
Can't use my chemistry degree for that. So.
All right, so somebody comes in, they present as being fatigued, they're not getting a full night's sleep. What are the things that you explore with them?
So the first thing I'll notice, obviously obesity contributes to that. So I always tell my patients, some of which have probably heard me say this, airway, breathing, circulation, the ABCs of medicine, traditionally or alternatively. So if you're having problems with snoring, if you possibly have sleep apnea, airway problems, allergy season is really bad right now, the pollen counts are really high. If most of us should be actually breathing through our nose and expelling through our mouth. So if any of those airway areas are restricted, that's going to be a problem. Once we've ruled that kind of thing out, and I'll kind of skip over that because I might send you for a sleep study or have a consult if we think there's a sleep problem with a sleep physician. Other than that, poor sleep hygiene. Most of us have probably heard of the term sleep hygiene. As simple as, everything from reading a book in bed with lights. So it's all about darkness, darkness, darkness. Truly, regarding melatonin production, darkness is very important. Second would be, again, sensory input, so noises, so phones. I tell people all the time, you've got to get an old-fashioned alarm clock. I go through this a lot with teenagers and college-age students. They never really grew up with alarm clocks, most of them, and it just boggles them to think that they would use an alarm clock as opposed to keeping their phone on. In the meantime, their brain is so triggered, even if they think, all of us, even if we think we're sleeping and we have those sounds going on or even the light coming on, that's definitely going to affect our sleep. So you want a room devoid of light, devoid of noise. If you have to have your phone in your room, have it off on airplane mode. We won't get into all the electromagnetic kind of waves that go through. Routers, my router is actually my master bedroom. I always shut it off at night. And then the mechanics. A good mattress, a good pillow, body mechanics. So those tend to be the basic sleep hygiene pieces I speak with people about. Well before, and I sell supplements for a living, well before I'm ever talking to patients about magnesium, melatonin, etc.
And do you see success?
Yeah, I would say out of the 50% of the people here, excluding the airway, breathing, circulation, okay, so that gets sent out to a specialist to be evaluated. So of the rest of those people that don't sleep, I promise you, on some level, most of you would have to admit that you're not maybe possibly following proper sleep hygiene protocol. And the other piece is it's true. I don't know how many have heard this, but it's absolutely true. It's more important to wake up approximately the same time every day than it is to even worry about what time you go to bed. To that point, the other thing I didn't mention is food and drink before bed because of acid reflux or just blood sugar issues. Very important you're consistent with that and don't have that happening too close to bedtime or when you're going to go lay flat because the whole acid reflux piece.
It's like 2 to 3 hours from your last meal.
It depends. I had someone today that was truly reactive hypoglycemic, so I wanted her to eat a little something, carb protein, about an hour before bed, but otherwise I agree with you, 2 hours minimum. You should stop eating and drinking water because that's the other thing, getting up, urinating, that kind of thing. So,
okay, so my third S of the evening is sperm. So I read an article in the New York Times, Nicholas Kristof, who writes a lot about international issues. He writes a lot about women's issues. But he wrote about sperm, and here's what he had to say. That the active sperm level for young men across the country, and I believe even outside of the United States, has diminished significantly, and that sperm are no longer swimming straight. They go in circles. And they've lost their sort of ability to get to where they're supposed to go.
Sad. Quality and quantity.
Right, it says, so here's the quote from him. 90% in a typical young man are misshapen, sometimes with 2 heads or 2 tails. That doesn't sound good to me. And what he related it to, which is I want to talk to you about, is toxic chemicals. That we are all absorbing so many toxins, particularly from plastics, and certainly what gets sprayed on crops and things like that, that is having an impact.
Yeah, so those are called endocrine disruptors. Endocrine being anything to do with the hormone system, and there are many hormones that we don't think about, but in this case, regarding the sperm, I can tell you, I probably order a sperm analysis, quantity, quality, at least once every 2 weeks, because I have a couple that might come in for infertility. The female's been worked up, the male has not, and part of that is, can we convince him to do a sperm analysis? And I agree with that statistic. I would say 9 out of 10 times, it's shocking how few viable, healthy sperm men in their 20s have. It's really shocking. Now, again, I'm not an infertility specialist, and I'm not ordering these sperm counts every day, but I truly can't tell you the last time I looked at a male in the last 5 years and said, oh, you're fine, your sperm analysis really was optimal. The endocrine disruptors, which I did write down to make sure I included everything, chemicals that affect our normal hormone levels and bioavailability, plastics, pesticides. Pesticides have a lot of, they mimic estrogens in the body, especially for all of us, but especially males. Cosmetics, soaps, lotions, flame retardant, that's found mostly in infant nightgowns and such. Formaldehyde that's found in deck wood, although, okay, we're getting away from that and we're going to plastic decking, which is another issue. And stress. I'd like to contribute to that by saying I have to have a conversation with the males also in regards to, in all fairness to this article, trying too hard to get someone pregnant, masturbation, all these things that help.
I am so glad I brought this up.
Heat, body
Yeah,
heat.
no jacuzzis if you're trying to get pregnant.
No
right.
whitey-tidies, I call them.
Right. So I want to talk about endocrine disruptors for a moment, because it's any kind of hormone area that
Correct.
it could be related to.
In fact, most of the time it actually affects the adrenal glands and those hormones, which are DHEA and cortisol. DHEA, we always know, is an anti-aging hormone, but it's profoundly important as a precursor to hormones, to actually signaling chemically hormones and telling them what to do and where to go. So it's incredibly important. And I was looking up some studies regarding this subject, and myself learned a little bit about just how much, because we don't hear that even in integrative medicine, how much these chemicals disrupt DHEA and cortisol, which are both in the adrenal gland, which cortisol is our natural stress hormone. Hydrocortisone cream over the counter is synthetic cortisol.
So we just are inhaling these, or we're drinking
every way
them.
that you can take a medicine, or topically, orally, inhaling, hair, you name it.
We absorb them.
Yes.
And it gets into our bloodstream.
Correct. And there are people who, you don't want me to go on my mitochondrial talk, do you? There are people that can range genetically. I do a lot of genetic testing. I had a patient yesterday that literally was 1/1000th of normal as far as the ability to detoxify, and that was purely based on her genetics. That is the difference. Something like an endocrine disruptor on her, it wouldn't take much to shut her down. Versus someone else, I'm probably at the 750 times, so I actually have pretty decent ability to detoxify, considering, but still, so it'd take a lot larger load of these chemicals to affect me that way.
But aren't we all full of toxins?
Yes.
Even if you're the perfect eater, all organic, even if you don't ever use anything plastic, aren't we all getting toxins into our system?
Yes.
I know you test kids who come in with all kinds of issues.
Autism, asthma, ADD, you name it.
Right. So you're testing them for heavy metals, for systemic yeast,
Mold's
for mold,
another one.
Allergies. Is this because they're born that way? I mean, is this coming through the placenta or through their mother's milk?
So in general, and let's just take, I have a pretty decent following of children. Most people that are bringing their kids to me are bringing them because they're on the autism spectrum and or have significant ADD, ADHD. And so I'm just going to take that group of children over the years. I would say 60% of them have, now that we can do genetics, a genetic polymorphism or change in their genes from the normal population that do not allow them to detoxify and or they get easily overwhelmed with exposure. The other 40% do not. 99% of them have a dysregulation in their immune system. 99%, almost every single kid I test, there is something going on with their immune system, and that's really the bigger issue causing inflammation, in particular neuroinflammation.
Why?
That's the $64,000 question. I have a theory about that, but I'll be honest, we really don't know why yet. We just don't. We don't do brain biopsies on people who are alive, thank God.
Well, yeah, that would be crossing the big line, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But so what about the issue of the blood-brain barrier if my theory would be, as most people that are in the business, it is toxic exposure. It's either in utero. I can definitely tell you, as I'm able to test genetics on kids that have been with me 13 years versus newer children I see now, it's amazing the amount of polymorphisms that the kids have acquired. So somehow genes are mutating. There's several factors. I see a lot more kiddos that were that parents had to use in vitro fertilization, older parents. There are a lot of factors and variables involved there. But I can absolutely tell you, now that genetics are available, children that I've had with me, including my son, who's 14, his genetics are less extreme or full of polymorphisms as the kiddos I'm even testing now that are 4 and 5 years old. So in my personal opinion, it definitely has something to do with chemical exposure. So with genetics, are we moving to that point where medicine will be tailored to each person's
Absolutely.
genetic makeup?
Absolutely.
And will that be better? Will that be more effective?
Not initially. It'll probably take a good 10 to 15 years, honestly. I don't always do genetic tests for my patients because I am a mother, and sometimes it's nice not to have alarming information if there's not much you can do about it initially anyway. Toxic metals. I rarely check that on a kid when they first come to see me, because that mom and dad will worry about that lead level or that mercury level being out the roof, and we can't do anything about it till we take care of the immune system, the GI system. We have to make sure they're pooping before we can get rid of mercury, or they're going to get really sick. So ethically, I don't think that's right for me in my practice. So that's a perfect example. Genetics the same way. I'll have parents that'll come in and say, I want genetic testing. And I just am really honest with them and tell them I don't think that's appropriate right now.
All right, so we're going to try a little experiment here with Nichole. Rudy and Katie are going to come down. They have microphones.
May I make one more comment about before we close that subject? So I wrote down a couple things because I'm big into what can we do about chemical exposure. Obviously, avoidance as much as possible. Eating organic is really important. Avoid plastics as much as possible, especially heated plastics, canned food, children's clothing. Make sure there's no added flame retardant, especially the little kiddos. Cash register receipts, old school cash register receipts and credit card receipts are a huge source of toxins. Clean water and drink enough water. Drink enough water. Half your body weight. So if you weigh 120 pounds, you should be drinking 60 ounces of water a day.
Rudy's over there. Where are you, Katie? Katie's back there. If you would like to ask a question, remember we have some special prizes. If you want to give us your name, great. If you're in the witness protection program, it's fine. You don't have to. We don't care. Nichole is willing to answer any question about any
And I'm willing
subject.
to say I don't know if I don't know.
Yeah,
but I'll try.
so.
Hi, Jennifer here.
Hi, Jennifer.
My question is with the plastics. A lot of times you can get healthy food, but they want you to microwave it in plastic. And even if it's good plastic, is that a bad idea?
It is a very bad idea. I will tell you what I will microwave: bacon, because it makes the nitrates in non-organic bacon. It neutralizes them. Hot dogs too. And that's about it. I'm weird about even putting microwave popcorn because of the liner. Even in the organic microwave, they still have a liner that's usually a plastic base.
And there are lots of people out there who will tell you, microwaves really sort of break down the essential DNA of the food. So
Which brings me to that point too. Another big source of chemical exposure is super heated oils. Cannot say enough about that. Even if you're using coconut oil, if you get that coconut oil too hot and you're deep frying something, you are giving yourself, I think it's 4 times more carcinogens in that moment than smoking a cigarette.
Start lighting up.
Yeah.
No. I take
It's
that
sugar.
back. I take that
Heated-
back.
Really heated sugar too. You know, I like my creme brulee too, but really.
Really?
Oh yeah.
So when they burn the sugar on top, that's bad?
It's a free radical technically. I can't say I won't eat it, but
Well, do you feel that way about barbecue, about
I am
grilling?
not an organorexic. I will disclose that. It's a Nichole term. I call them organorexics, and it's all good. I love you guys. But I'm your practical provider, so I do some bad things too, like eat my little creme brulee with that heated.
But what about grilling?
Grilling is okay as long as you're not
Charring
super
it.
charring things. Yeah, but more to that point, fat, oil. So if you have a really lean piece of fish and you char it, it's not going to be the same type of free radical as something that's been marinating in even olive oil, which is bad just because it's a low temperature oil anyway.
Right. Yeah.
My name's Anne, and I would like your opinion on whether or not you think everyone should take a probiotic every day.
Yes. I wouldn't have said that necessarily 5 years ago, believe it or not, but I do say that now, yes. A good quality probiotic, and I will forewarn you, look up just Google histamine intolerance. There are certain probiotics that are naturally made from like kefir and kombucha that if you're a person that genetically doesn't break down histamine very well, or you have allergies you deal with that are very bad, especially this time of year, watch the types of probiotics you use. There is a difference.
Can you tell us more about why it's important to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth?
Yeah, well, I mean, we naturally should be doing that when we sleep. But it's really important because our nose is really made to be like a humidifier and filter for our body. And so we will react less to any air that's coming in with contaminants or allergens than we will if we breathe through our mouth, okay? Now, I meditate. I think I've naturally gotten better at breathing like that because, of course, when I'm sleeping, I don't know if I breathe through my mouth, my nose, whatever, right? So squared breathing, if you've heard of that, you meditate is kind of that concept where you breathe in, hold for, let's say, 4 seconds, breathe out, hold at the bottom for 4 seconds, breathe in, breathe out.
If you do all mouth breathing,
Yeah, and the humidity piece, you're getting dry, you're going to have some irritation of your airway.
There's a few articles that came out about the history of like before we had electricity and
Sure.
there would be a
agree.
second sleep. You know, obviously people had a longer night most of the time and you'd go to sleep earlier, but then they'd wake up and then they'd go
Right.
back to sleep. And so you'd have this broken sleep cycle. So you wouldn't be getting a straight 7 or 8 hours necessarily. And I've known people that have that sleep cycle and they always wrestle with the standard that they're supposed
Right.
to be sleeping a minimum of 7 hours straight through.
She's speaking of in pioneer days, for lack of better words, they've done studies or anthropological studies to realize that people used to, because they were mostly farmers, at least in Indiana, would go to sleep when the sun went down, when they couldn't work anymore. They'd wake up in the middle of the night, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, and that's when they'd have family time. People would get together, they'd get together and eat, and they'd play board games. Very interesting, right? And it made sense for the times. They didn't have light, they didn't have heat. I am like a 6 to 6.5 hour max sleeper. It is much more important to get into good stage 4 sleep at least 3 times a night. Okay, that's an hour and a half to 2 hours, okay, than it is the quantity of sleep. So I'm glad you brought that point up. This minimum of 7 hours, and Alex and I have talked about this before, really is not nearly as important as the quality of sleep that you get, because there are plenty of people, as you know, that have 7 to 9 hours of sleep and never really feel well rested because they've only gotten into 1 or 2 cycles of good REM sleep.
I want to say to Nichole, thank you as always
Thank
for
you.
being the annual anniversary guest, and to say to all of you and those listening, thanks so much for tuning in. This is Alex Litwack. Have a great week.
Thank you.